which I don't want to spend the money for. There's a blue part of me that doesn't want to spend money. So, it'll come up here in a second. What's that? All right. We've had prayer. We've had good food. Did you know that there is one thing that every brain style has in common? At least one. And that one thing is that they all get groggy after eating. So at this meeting, I may ask you to stand up randomly so as to help somebody who is half-mast stay alert. Is that okay, Roger? Yes. All right. Okay, we're going to focus this time, and we're going to do some things together that'll be a little more active that I hope will help you to be able to process your food and process with your brain too. Okay, now hopefully that will come up. It's still not talking for some reason. I'm not sure if it's not plugged in or what's happening here. Oh, this came out. That could be the reason right there. There, that should make a difference. There we go. Okay. Unfortunately, most married couples are familiar with this picture. Sooner or later, I've had some people tell me that they've never, ever had an unhappy conversation. And I have serious questions about that, Mary. So I think sooner or later, if you are married and if you care, you're going to end up having a conversation that's not necessarily comfortable because you have to talk over some things. I'm not sure what's happening, Don. It's just why it's doing that. You try doing that. There we go. Okay. Nope. I don't know. Something's happening. Let's go to the beach. Don't touch anything. Oh, okay. This is what I've been using, and this one is very reliable. And this one, I can't use the power on it, so I'm not sure what's happening there.
Hey, Don, try flipping it 180.
That's a good, you know what, that's a good idea. That does sometimes make a difference. But in this case, it didn't make any difference. So, well, that's okay, because we can get by without it. Do you remember what our Bible verse is? Guard your heart above all else, because it determines the course of your life. So what's in your heart from this point on determines how you get along with your spouse and how you get along with other church members and people you work with, people in the community. And you form opinions about things. If you have an argument with somebody at church, or if you have an argument with somebody at work, and especially if you have more than one, you begin to make a decision about that person so that it becomes more difficult for you to have a relationship with that person, at least on that subject. So that at some point you will say, you know what, we never get along on this topic. I think it's best if we don't talk about it at all. So, because that's what's in your heart. And so you said to them, Jesus said in Matthew 12, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so what's in your heart about that person is going to come out, especially if you get pressured, if you're under duress or whatever it might be.
Man, I have one in my office.
You have one of those in your office?
Yeah,
oh. It's been working just fine, but you know, that's the nature of electronics. So, what's that?
It says to touch setup now.
We have a lot of people that have blue in them, and they're all wanting to get up here and tinker. And Feel free. One more time. Okay. That's right. It worked that time. Oh, all right. There's something going on. I'm not sure what it is. So maybe if you know what, all else fails, you do a hard reset. So let me do that. All right. So let's try to stay on track with me. All right. So what's in your heart is based on what you've seen, heard, touched, taste, and smell that you choose to be in your heart. You said, that's the way it is, and that's a decision. You said, okay, my husband and I are never going to agree on that, and you just made a decision. We're never going to agree on that. And so now that's in your heart. So whenever it comes up, your response is, I really don't want to talk about that. Or if you and I talk about that, we're going to talk about that with somebody else present because we don't see eye to eye. We don't get along, and I really don't want to have bad feelings. And so let's just either not talk about it, or let's talk about it with somebody who can help us figure out why we can't get past this, And so you made that decision. It's in your heart, and so now that affects how you are relating to either your spouse or your children or somebody else in your family or people at work. Okay, restarting. So what's in your heart determines how your relationships are going to go from this moment on for the rest of your life. And then there will be other things that will determine it from that point, because things come and go in your heart as you choose to either put them in there or kick it out. And in churches, in my experience in pastoring with quite a few different churches, these can be very long-standing feuds with people who come to that same church for many years, but they avoid each other because they just don't get along, and they haven't learned how to get past that thing. So, okay. There we are. Sometimes you just have to turn things off and restart. So, okay. So this is the result of what's in your heart, is the result of seeing things. Like in this case, if you want God's law to be in your heart, you knew about it, but then you make a choice. I want to follow God's law. I want to be honest and true and moral and dependable, and I want to be a God worshiper, not an idol worshiper, and I don't want to hate, and I don't want to covet, and don't want to lie. That all becomes part of who you are, because now it's in your heart that you want to live by this very high standard that God has given to us. The interesting thing is that you and your spouse can both be very converted people. You can really love Jesus and really love the Bible, and you can sit in the pews with people around you who all go to the same church, and you all really love Jesus and you all really love the Bible, and yet you end up doing this. And the reason you end up doing this is because you don't see things the same way. Your brain sees what it sees. A person who is green, when somebody says, this really happened, by the way, when somebody says, we need to remove the pulpit from the platform and be more modern, because modern churches don't use pulpits, it sends the wrong message to today's culture, so we need to remove the pulpit from the platform and have a more free-flowing style of worship, and that will be more modern and more acceptable to younger people today, and we want to attract more younger people. All right? Well, first of all, everybody, boys and girls, younger people are way more complicated than that, okay? And just because you remove a pulpit from the platform is not necessarily going to draw young people to come to your church. So I was the new pastor at that church, and they had just gone through this, and the previous pastor had to leave. He had to leave because of the church fight that had taken place surrounding him and the changes that he wanted to make there to the service and to the church. And I found out about that in the process of interviewing to go to that church, and I knew immediately what I was going to do before I ever got there. So I met with the elders ahead of time before I ever got moved there, and I said, do you guys have any problem with the pulpit being on the platform? No, we have no problem with that. I said, where is it? And they knew exactly where it was. I said, let's go get it. We're going to put it back right now. I hadn't even been there, hadn't even been to the church to speak or anything yet. I said, we're going to go get that. We're going to put that pulpit back on the platform. And they said, why? We had a big hassle getting it off the platform. Why do you want to put it back? I said, because you've disenfranchised a whole bunch of people who could not live with that decision, and you went too fast. And so you have to backtrack now to get them back, to get them dialed back in. And so we did that, and I'll never forget the first Sabbath I was there, which was the next Sabbath. There was the pulpit, and I'll never forget this lady. She went to the front of the church. She stood there and bawled. She just cried buckets of tears because the pulpit was put back on the platform. She's very green, very, very green. And that pulpit represented a ton of stuff to her from the time she was a child. And she'd gone to that church her whole life. And some of her most beloved people had spoken from that pulpit, sung from that pulpit, and she came to associate with that pulpit all of those beautiful memories. And the process went way too fast. She didn't have time to even catch her breath before suddenly it was gone. And she had quit coming to church. But because I was the new pastor, she said, well, I'll go this first time and see how it is. You know, when a new pastor comes, it always works that way. So she came and she saw that pulpit, and she asked around, and she caught me after church. She said, you put the pulpit back? I said, yeah. She hugged me really, really hard. Thank you so much. And it turned out that she was one of the movers and shakers in that church. And every church has movers and shakers, and she was one of those. And not only did that affect her, but it affected a whole group of people that she was a part of. And they could not move forward. See, sometimes you have to take a step back before you can take a step forward. And it has to do with the brain. It's all about the brain and how people see things. And every brain needs what it needs in order to live. And green people need stability. They need change too, but they need to not have it be so fast and not so against their will. There needs to be enough conversation, enough prayer, and enough negotiation until that change can be made in a way that they can at least accept on some level. Okay? They may never really truly be happy with it completely, but they need to be able to accept it on some level in order for the church to stay healthy and move forward. So she became one of the strongest later on because of putting the pulpit back. She became one of the strongest advocates in a new program that we wanted to try that had never been tried before. She was, now, because we had put the pulpit back, she was willing to trust that she could put her confidence in this new program, knowing that we respected how she felt and how other people like her felt. So the same thing happens in marriages. When you are with each other in a marriage, you have to respect how each other sees things and not just make unilateral decisions. In another church I pastored, there was a fellow who decided that the church needed a copy machine. So he went out and bought a copy machine with the church's money without talking to anybody. And suddenly here is a new copy machine in the office, which cost a significant amount of money. And where did this copy machine came from? And, I went and got it. You did. Who approved it? I didn't think we needed to take it to the board. That we need a copy machine. And he didn't stay long. They could no longer work with him. Anytime you make a unilateral decision, whether it's in a marriage or in a church, you are jeopardizing the relationships with those people. And you're in essence saying that what I want and what I think is more important than what you think and what you want and how you feel. That's what you're really saying. And that message comes through loud and clear, and so then people don't trust you after that, whether it's a husband and wife situation. Husbands and wives make it hard for each other to trust each other because of doing things like this. It's really important that you understand the brain of your spouse and what they need in order to move and to live and to have their being. and that you communicate with people in a way that they can understand. And that's really what we're talking about today. And these guys had to communicate long enough and sincere enough until they could all be on the same page. And see, unity was so important to them. Unity was more important to them than progress, because they knew that God would not bless so-called progress if there was not unity. Remember the big prayer that Jesus prayed before he was crucified was, Lord, that they may all be one. That's a big deal to God. I mean, after all, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, they are all what? One. And that they all may be one, even as you and I are one, Jesus prayed. Unity is a big deal. And you don't want to pay, trust me, you don't want to pay the price of causing disunity, because you will lose so much time. You may gain an issue. You may gain the upper hand on an issue, but you will lose progress moving toward the goal of saving souls, which is the business of the church. That is our business, as I said last night, is saving souls. And if that really is your understanding, and that's really what you're moving for, then everybody gets on the page of what does it take to save souls. And you discuss it, and you work through it, and you pray about it until you can all come to an agreement. This is what we have to do to save souls in Mount Vernon or in North Cascade or wherever it may be, because that really is your goal. Your goal is not to be a truth machine to anybody and everybody indiscriminately. Your goal is not to be innovative and be the most innovative church in town. Your goal is not to have a well-oiled machine that has stood the test of time. Your goal is not to be a person that is a go-to person for everybody in town necessarily. Your goal is to save souls. That's it. That's the goal of a church, is to save souls. And what do I have to do as a creative person to get on board with that? What do I have to do as an analytical person to get on board with that? So a lot of church divisions are because they don't have a unified goal. They're not working for the same thing. These people are dug in not wanting to change the hymn book, or to change the color of the rug, or to have a different set of doors on the front of the building because they like it the way it is. And they totally resist change no matter what it is. They don't like change. And these people, their goal often is about social causes in the community. Well, we need to take a stand here, and we need to let people know how we feel here, and they get sidetracked on that. And these people, they're always wanting to change everything and wanting to try all kinds of things, almost whatever happens to come into their mind on that particular day at times. And these people here, they're all about money when it comes to a church, and it's about, we've got to take good care of the money, okay? Well, taking care of the money is not your goal. And making sure that the hymn books stay in the pew, that's not your goal. And making sure that people in the community know how you feel about all the social issues, that's not your goal. And it's not your goal to keep coming up with new inventive things all the time. Your goal is to save souls. And so what do I have to do in this brain that God gave me to be on board with saving souls? That's the goal. And it's worth any sacrifice you have to make for just one soul. Desire of Ages, for example, says that whole worlds sink into insignificance in comparison with the worth of one soul. Just one soul. So it's important that as a couple, you be on the same page with the goal you're striving for. Husband, let's say wife says, we need a bigger house. Why? Husband, usually married to a blue person. Why? Well, because we now have 3 kids instead of 1, and we can't expect them to keep using the same room forever. We've got to have a bigger home. Well, it costs too much money. Well, I don't care how much money it costs. We have to do something. We can't do this. We're going to end up with a lot of angry things taking place in this home, and we're going to go insane if we don't have enough room to raise this family. We've got to do something about it. And so they end up having this conversation over and over and over again. And if they dig in, if they get stubborn about it, it can go on for a very long time and cause a lot of heartache. And he says, we need to move. I'm tired of this community. We need to move to a different community. I want to go work in, Kalamazoo. And And she says, hey, I grew up here. I like it here. I want to stay here. Well, I respect that, but, I can't continue to stay here. Well, if you move, you're going to move without me, And these kind of conversations take place because you're not on the same page about what's important. And so you end up retreating to your dominant brain style, and you keep saying the same things to each other from your point of view, and everybody's eyes glaze over and they say, push the replay, I've heard it before. I've heard that tape. Just play it again. I know what the tape says. So you have to come to a place where you really talk to each other and really listen to each other and learn to talk the language of the other person so that they can understand. So when these papers I've given you, you've got this synopsis there somewhere. And I wish that you would really understand your spouse and really take a look at that, and that you not judge your spouse. A lot of men and women tend to criticize and judge their spouse, if not verbally, certainly in their heart and mind. And remember, what's in your heart determines the course of your life. This affects your sex life. It affects your recreational life. It affects your family, how you raise your children. It affects everything because it's in your heart. And so people use weapons with each other in marriage that they have. They say, well, I'm not going to do that. I know you want that, but I'm not going to do that because this is not happening. And because that's not happening, forget that. And those kind of conversations take place in Adventist homes all the time, every year. And people like me end up trying to help two very angry people figure it out. One couple came to me one time, and they were ready to get a divorce, an Adventist couple. They had been married for many years. They were ready to get a divorce because they couldn't agree on how to keep the Sabbath. So they were ready to break the seventh commandment because they couldn't agree on the fourth commandment. Okay? So, this happens with people all the time, and it's serious business. And it requires a commitment on your part to really understand your spouse and where your spouse is coming from and how to talk to your spouse. These things that you're looking at right here, these are not options for these people. These are needs. It's like a horse needs to eat grass, okay, or hay or oats or something like that. They have to. It's not an option. You can say to the horse, well, why can't you just get along on sugar cubes? Well, just try sugar cubes for a while with the horse and see what happens, Eventually they waste away. They can't live on sugar cubes. They have to have good, wholesome food. So these needs here, you're married to somebody who has a set of needs. And if their brain is not getting this, you're just asking for trouble. You're asking for a demise in your marriage in some way. So I know nobody ever likes to talk about this, but the reality of it is that there are two things in Adventist homes that drive everybody crazy, but nobody ever really likes to talk about it. One is money and the other is sex, okay? So here we go. This person is very matter-of-fact when it comes to sex. It's very matter-of-fact. They don't need a lot of accoutrements. They don't need a lot of romance or foreplay. They're just very matter-of-fact as a rule. It's like, okay, but they're typically married to people like this. And these people need romance. And they need some ambiance, and they need some time to work up to having a romantic encounter. And then they end up in fights about it. Why can't you? This person says, why can't you be more warm? And you buy books and say, here, read this. And it doesn't really change that person because this person has the brain that God gave them. So what this person needs to understand is that they need to cross over here. So where is take out the one that has your graph on it, that has the 0 and the 70. Take out your piece of paper and take a look at that. So it's this one right here. So yeah, there you go. Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd like to use it. Yeah. Okay. So the farther apart you are in your quadrants from each other, the more glucose you have to burn to come together. Okay? So if somebody is 120 here and the other person they're married to is 120 here, they have to go a long way to meet glucose-wise. It takes a lot of energy. So when you ask for a sexual encounter, and he's here or she's here, and he's here or she's here, then that takes a lot of glucose to make that happen. So you have to take that into consideration, and you have to plan and give it some thought, and not just get mad when things don't happen the way you think they should, okay? And this person here, they like variety in their sex life. They don't want to just go at it the same way every time. Their brain dies if sex is the same every single time, year after year after year. And this person needs predictability. So people that are in these situations, the counsel that I've given to them is, listen, to this blue person I will say, you need to understand what romance is, and it's never going to feel quite natural to you, but it's something you need to do for your spouse's sake. You're going to burn glucose doing it. You're not going to feel comfortable doing it, but you can at least have the thought in your mind and understand that you're doing something that makes your spouse happy, and therefore you can have some satisfaction from knowing that you've participated with her or him in a way that brings some satisfaction to them. Instead of digging in your heels and being stubborn and saying, I don't need to do that, I don't feel like doing that, I don't want to do that, that's not a Christ-like attitude, is it? No. Is it? No, it's not. You need to say, I need to do what I need to do in order to be a part of this marriage for the sake of my spouse. And to these people, I say, you need to give them time. You're so quick and fast to warm up to affection and physical encounters because that's your nature. It's the way God made you. You need to give this person more time so that they can adjust in their thinking. To this person, I will say to them, you need to understand your spouse and how they feel about various sexual encounters, and you need to say to yourself that you need to be respectful of them and what their comfort zone is, and not push them to do things they don't feel good about doing. And to this person, I will say, you need to understand that your spouse needs more variety. So you're going to have to consider what your bandwidth is in the area of variety and be willing to experiment a little bit for the sake of your spouse. Okay? And everybody feels uncomfortable in the whole process. That's what compromise and that's what unity is about. It's about working through uncomfortableness to arrive at a good place. Okay? But digging in your heels and saying no, and everybody has a tendency, by the way, if you're religious, if you're a Christian, then everybody has a tendency to say, that's not right. That's not God's will. Go read Song of Solomon and then say that. Okay? So but we pull out the religious card as kind of a trump card when we don't want to cooperate with our spouse. Well, my conscience won't let me do that, whatever that is. And trust me, I've heard it all, pretty much. I've heard it all, okay? And everybody has something that they don't feel comfortable with in their marriage, and they pull out the religious card and say, well, I don't think Jesus would do that. And I don't think, and I don't think, the angels would like that. And, and some people even say, well, the angels are watching me, and I don't want to, and so. Okay. All right. So I've tried to cover a whole bunch of stuff about sex, so I'm not. Remember, I pastor teenagers. I've heard it all, okay? All right. So money, same deal. Money, in fact, money is the biggest cause of divorce in the United States. It's listed in 98%, no exaggeration, no guesswork here. This is coming from the government. 98% of divorces, exactly that figure, in the United States, money is one of the main causes of that divorce. sex is listed as number 2. Money is the biggest issue causing divorces in our country today. And again, it's about not understanding how the other person thinks and how they view money and what money is to them and how that fits in with their brain style. To this person, money is a vehicle to accomplish exciting things. To this person, money is to be saved for unpredictable things that are surely coming someday. To this person, money is about establishing a system of security that makes them feel comfortable. And for this person, money is for the purpose of helping friends and family. And these people are married to each other, opposites typically. And so, not always, but often. And as a result of that, they disagree stringently about how money should be used. And it creates real heartache with people, especially because it tends to be chronic and it goes year after year after year. And the other person just tries to put up with it, especially if they're a Christian and they don't believe in divorce. But I have met a lot of people who don't believe in divorce who finally can't take it anymore, and tearfully they get a divorce. And they feel like they're condemned to hell for the rest of their life because they can't take it anymore. So it's really important that you take seriously what we're talking about, because you're married to somebody who has a brain. And that brain needs stuff. It needs what it needs. And if you're not willing to give it to them, Satan will make sure that somebody else does. Are you hearing me here? And this is how affairs get started, because they're getting something from somebody that they just simply can't get from you, because you won't give it to them. And I would like to submit to you that that is very un-Christ-like. Can you imagine coming to Jesus and saying, Lord, I'm hungry, and him saying, sorry, tough, too bad, live without it, I don't care? Can you imagine that? No. Yeah. And so I've been amazed, actually, as a pastor. I'm just going to be honest. I've been astonished as a pastor how many un-Christ-like attitudes I find in the people that go to my churches over the years. How they treat each other in their home. I've come home to my wife after a counseling session with a family, and I've seen and heard how they treat each other, and I will come home to her and I will say, I can't tell you who and I can't tell you what, but my heart is broken because of the way they treat each other. It's not okay. So it's important for you to really listen to your spouse about who they are and how their brain works, and that you do what you need to do with the help of Jesus, to be sacrificial, to be unselfish, and do what you need to do to help that person. And then somebody will say, well, they don't do it for me. Well, that's what it means to be Christ-like. Christ died, Romans chapter 5, verse 5. God shows his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And that's what it means to be a Christian. You make the sacrifices and you make the unselfish decisions for the good of others, and you pray and you trust that as you give, you shall surely receive. Okay? Okay, any questions about any of that so far? Yeah.
So a little bit back where you were talking about the board meetings.
Yeah.
So if you're the creative guy and you have the money, you have the idea,
Yep.
it's a lot easier decision for the blue people or the green people when you say, here's the money, project, go for it.
Yeah. That sounds like, on the surface, that sounds like it would work. But they haven't been part of the process. And you have to remember, it's not just about the money, it's about process. And it's about allowing them to be part of the process, because it's not your church, it's our church. And you're part of that church along with them. And they need to know that they're part of your church and that you're part of their church. So even if you do have the money and you have the idea and you can make it work and you say, all I need is your rubber stamp, what you've done is you've actually diminished their importance. You've said, I don't need you, I really don't, and I'm only doing this because it's a formality. So you've reduced them to a legal transaction. And nobody likes that. Nobody wants to feel like that. So nobody wants to think, well, I'm just here to say yes. You know, they need to be part of the process. Okay? That was a good question. Yes, you come to the decision together. Yeah. And of course it helps for the blue people, it helps if you're willing to fork out the money, of course, you know. But they don't want to be reduced to a dollar sign. Blue people don't want to be put in that place because they have other aspects of their mind and character. So, okay? I'm sorry. Yes. Right? That's a good example. That's a perfect example, matching grants and things like that. Sure, absolutely. That allows people to be part of the process. Yeah, good. Okay. Any other questions so far? Yeah, Roger.
Another thing too, with people that lose money represents value and legacy as well, and they want to make sure that if they're going to give money to something, that legacy has value.
It has value to it. Exactly. That's a bigger issue. You're right than just the money. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to take a real risk here.
Okay.
And this is a serious question.
Yes. Okay.
Was the problem when Christ came between him and the Pharisees, was it that Christ didn't give the Pharisees enough time?
No, not in that case. He gave them lots of time. In fact, if you consider all the prophets he sent to Jerusalem, and if you consider the long history of his interaction with Israel, if you take that into consideration, and then if you consider that he spent 3 years, and most of the time, if you look at the Gospels and you see who he was talking to most of the time, it was the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin. A lot of his stuff that is in red letters, it was dialogue between he and them. So he spent a huge amount of time trying to help them. The issue with them was that they were corrupt. They were not godly men in many cases. Some of them were, but many of them were not. They were bound by their traditions that did not come from Scripture, but came from ancient men who had gone before them. And they had come to elevate that to a place of sacredness and holiness, even above God's law and God's word. That was the problem with the Pharisees.
So the reason I ask that question is just because as we sit here and listen, it all seems very easy. The problem is that, for example, the example you gave us with the lady in the pulpit.
Right.
She broke the relationship and left.
Right.
And so the answer, the solution then was, because you said to us, she felt disenfranchised because all of these are needs.
Yes.
So the response that you gave them then was, we're going to put the pulpit back.
Right. In her case, yeah.
In her case.
Mm-hmm.
That left several people disenfranchised.
No, I didn't. See, I'm telling you a story. You don't know all of the details and all the aspects of that story. I did mention to you that I spent time with the elders. We processed it together as a group, and we came to that decision as a group. I told them I felt they needed to put the pulpit back, but it was their decision whether or not to do it. And they agreed with what I said to them, and we decided together to put that pulpit back. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, so some of these, a lot of the things that we move through as we try to relate with one another,
Mm-hmm.
different viewpoints,
Mm-hmm.
is oftentimes not nearly as simple as it might seem.
Oh, no, yeah, and I apologize if I make it seem too simplistic, but, you know, sometimes things are simple, but they're not easy. You know, apologizing is simple, but it's often not easy. It means swallowing pride and being willing to admit that you were wrong or that you said or did something you shouldn't have done. That's not easy to do. It is simple, but it's not easy. So, good, thank you. That was good. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Could you repeat the original question?
The original question was, sometimes what I'm saying up here seems simple, but and he needed more clarification about the pulpit and how that process took place. And he thought, well, maybe by putting it back, I had disenfranchised other people because I put it back. And I said to him, as you heard, I said, we processed it, and it wasn't just me saying we're going to do that. So, yeah.
About Jesus and the Pharisees. Yeah.
Oh, okay. His question about the Pharisees, he said, did Jesus not give the Pharisees enough time? And so then you heard my response to that. So, yeah.
Well, Jesus answered that question. He said, even if Abraham would have shown
Yeah.
up in person, he still wouldn't.
Right. Even if Abraham, yeah, exactly. Yeah, good. Yeah.
So, you were talking about, like you had the slide that showed the disciples and then coming to 100% consensus. That
Right. They came to consensus, yeah.
Even in the example that you gave with the pulpit,
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing there still wasn't 100% because just because you talked with the elders, there's still the other people in the, in the congregation.
Okay, so he said, I'm guessing that even though you came to consensus with the elders, there were still other people in the pews who maybe didn't necessarily agree with that. Okay, I want to answer your question honestly, but I'm a little bit afraid to. Okay? But I want to tell the truth. And the truth is that people in the churches who are in positions of leadership have been voted there by the church. And then there's other people who may not be in a position of leadership, but they have a lot to say about what goes on in that church. Because they've been there forever, or because they have a lot of money, or because of whatever connection they have with people. Like one church I pastored, pretty much everybody in the church was related to each other through marriage. I'm serious. And there was a situation that arose with one of the members of that church who was carrying on an adulterous relationship, and everybody knew about it. And that was not okay. And when I brought it to the church board for discussion as to what to do, they would not talk about it at all. And because it involved a conference employee, that meant that the conference was involved. And they wanted to know what I was doing about it. And I said, well, I'm trying to process it. And then when I told the president that the church board would not have anything to do with that discussion, they wouldn't even touch it because they're all related to the situation. He said, well, you got to call a business meeting and we'll come down from the conference office. So they came down to that business meeting, and he, as the president, tried to get them to discuss it, and they would not discuss it, even with the president standing right there. And so he finally said to the church, he said, okay, he said, this is against what we believe as a church. It's against even the decency of this community. And if you are not willing to deal with this, then I will take your church to the executive committee to recommend disbanding this church.
He sounds like a blue-green kind of guy.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, well,
There's going to be a catch.
yeah. So they finally agreed to deal with it, and it wasn't easy for them, but they finally agreed to deal with it, and the decision they made was to disfellowship that young lady, and when the decision was made, there were people who were fully in agreement with it, but then, as this one of you just said, there were people who still did not agree with it and didn't want to do it. But the issue is, you have to process, and you have to let everybody be part of the process. And you don't want to move so fast that people don't have a chance to process. But once you've given everybody a chance to process, and the decision has been made, then humbly, respectfully, you move ahead. Because that's what a church does. That's who we are. You know? No matter how uncomfortable it is, yeah. But you do have to let people have a chance to process. So, yeah.
Does it sometimes matter a stage of faith? So, for instance, sometimes in these conflicts, a person might be obviously this great dominant, but they're at a stage of faith where they can compromise seemingly more for the love and salvation of the other.
Yeah.
So, for the lady who,
Yeah.
I mean, you give a little more because
Right.
you realize how important
Yeah.
that.
And in the case of the pulpit, those who were willing to take it down, it wasn't even really a big issue.
Right.
You know? So in that case, it was an easy decision for the elders to make because none of them really cared that much about it, one way or the other. So, you know. Okay. Here's a list. You might want to take a picture of this to help people in your life. This is a list of careers that go with these brain styles, typical careers that these people end up being involved in. So blue people: doctors, dentists, generals, financiers, investors, pilots, technicians, maintenance, police, executives, lawyers, researchers, business owners, to name a few. Green people: managers, teachers, librarians, file clerks, office managers, inspectors, quality control, safety officers, nurses, museums, routine-oriented type careers. Red people: human relations, counselors, musicians, pastors, psychology, team building, social workers, receptionists, actors, EMTs, comfort-oriented people, like hotel concierge type people and things like that. Yellow careers: consultants, rangers, farmers, guides, firefighters, pastors, parks, recreation, artists, chefs, inventors, consensus managers, missionaries, ambassadors, to name a few. These are careers that these people often fit into and enjoy very much without burning out. Okay? Burnout occurs for physical and mental reasons, and sometimes relational reasons, but physically speaking, burnout occurs when you are a blue person in a red career. You're going to burn out. Your brain is going to fizzle because you're burning so much glucose energy every day. Or you're a green person trying to be a guide at a national park, and you're going to burn out. It's just not you, okay? So it's important to recognize that as you're working with your young people and other people in your life. If you're a red person, you like this car, this type of car, because it's a family car, and you can get more people in that car. You might even like a minivan because the more the merrier. Red people like having everybody together, and it's important to have them all in the same car, okay? If you are a blue person, you probably like this because it's fancy, it's technical, and it's got lots of good things about it. You won't like it though because it costs too much money, but you, as a blue person, you're probably going to buy it anyway, even if it costs a lot of money, because the tech toys outweigh the cost of having them, okay? Right? If you're a yellow person, you're going to drive something like this. Or you're going to drive something like that. Okay. If you're a green person, you're going to drive something practical like that. Okay, economical, point A to point B, easy.
Drive a Prius.
Okay, all right. Mr. Left Brain back there. Okay. Okay, we've looked at that already, and we've talked about the opposite factor of that. I want to visit this again. You please try to remember that personality is not the same thing as what we're talking about. I know you're used to thinking of it that way, but the thing is that you can be a phlegmatic yellow, which means you've got plans for adventure, and no matter what anybody says, you're going to do it because you're so stubborn, even if it costs you your life. Okay, or you can be a melancholy organizational person. You have to have things neat and tidy so you can think, and if anybody messes with it, you go into depression, because it's like the end of your world. Somebody's messed up your perfect world. Melancholies need the perfect world. Or you can be a sanguine blue, as I mentioned earlier today, or you can be a choleric red. And there's so many options with personality that go with how your brain works, okay? So we're really talking here again about what you need in your brain to be able to think, to process, to communicate, to be who God made you to be. And also introvert, extrovert. And then tomorrow morning when we talk, I'm going to talk with you about energy and how that plays into the factor too. All right, so we're going to talk. I want you to pull out that page I gave you on communication. I think it's green. I want you to take a look at that. We're going to go through that for a little bit here. This is part of what I'm sharing with you now is part of what I do in premarital counseling to help people prepare for marriage. And the Bible has a huge amount to say about communication. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of this. If you want to stop and ask a question or clarify, please do that. But marriage, or communication problems in marriage, it's very clear in the Bible, it's because of sin. The reason we have trouble in marriage and the reason we don't communicate well in marriage is because of sin. And it's not your spouse's sin, it's your sin, okay? You're a sinner and your spouse is a sinner. And because of that, there's dysfunction and complication. One of my favorite books by Henry Brandt, a Baptist psychologist, he wrote a book called When You're Tired of Treating the Symptoms and You're Ready for a Cure, Give Me a Call. And one of the stories in there is about a football player for the National Football League whose marriage was falling apart. And he was a Christian and his wife was a Christian, but their marriage was falling apart. So somebody said they should go to Henry Brandt because he was a nationally known psychologist. So they went to him and they sat down. He said, okay, I'm going to give you 15 minutes to tell me what the problem is, and I'm going to watch my clock. And you've got 15 minutes, and when the 15 minutes is up, that's the end of your part of this visit. And they said, okay. So they launched into this discussion, and of course, they wanted to go longer than 15 minutes because there were so many terrible things to say about each other. But when the 15 minutes was up, he stopped them. He said, okay, that's it. He said, I know what the problem is. And the football player said, how can you possibly know what the problem is with only 15 minutes? He said, it's actually quite easy. He said, I have the solution. I know what the problem is, and I have the solution. Well, okay, what is it? And the football player said, and he said, the problem is sin. He said, you both are sinners. You're both selfish. You're both making demands of each other that are very un-Christ-like. He said, it's sin. That's the problem. And there's only one solution. You need to be converted. And they said, well, I've been a Christian since I was a child. I know, but you need to be converted. You need to be born again. You need to have a Christ-like spirit. And that comes from being converted, from being born again. It doesn't come from being religious. It comes from knowing Jesus. And that Jesus is living in your heart. He said, that's the solution. Football player is very mad. He stood up, took his wife by the hand and said, we're leaving. And then Henry said to him, well, when you're tired of treating the symptoms and you're ready for a cure, give me a call. Months went by, and they were right on the verge of divorce. They both knew it, and his wife said, let's go back to Henry. So they went back to Henry, and he said, the problem hasn't changed. Are you ready to try the solution? And they said yes. And so he explained to them what it really meant to have Jesus be in control of your life. Complete surrender of everything. No more being a narcissist. No more being a control freak. You surrender everything to Jesus and let Jesus take control. And both of them tearfully said, that's what we need. So they all knelt down there together, and Henry led them in a genuine prayer of surrender of their hearts to Christ. And then he gave them some things from the Bible and some things to read and other stuff to work on. And Henry in his story said it took months because they had a lot of things to forgive and a lot of things to correct. But he said eventually they got through it and they were very happily married at that point. So at the bottom of everything is that we're sinners. And we need a Savior. Someone who can change how we feel and how we think on a given day and enable us to be like Jesus in our marriage. And that takes communication. So that's the first one. This next one, if the only thing you get out of what we're doing right now is this one thing, it will be huge. Repeat after me. I will never make an assumption. Okay, I want you to say it all together with me. I will never make an assumption. I will never make an assumption. And we're talking about in dealing with your spouse. I will never make an assumption. You're never going to assume, by God's grace from this moment on, you're never going to assume that you know what your spouse is doing, what they're thinking, how they feel, or what they want, or what they should want, or how they should feel, or where they should go, or what they should do. You're no longer going to be the master of your spouse. You're not going to make assumptions anymore. What you're going to do is you're going to listen. You're going to listen and not assume that you know what to tell them to do all the time and how they need to fix everything. You're going to listen. You're not going to assume. So here's a real story. A newlywed couple, 2 years into their marriage, he was working, and she didn't like a lady that was at his place of work. She felt like she was a flirt, and she thought that she was glancing at her husband in a flirtatious way from time to time. She did not like that. And she spoke with her husband about it, and he assured her that he had absolutely zero interest in that lady. As far as he was concerned, she was as far away as Mars and Venus from who he wanted to be and what he wanted in his life. But she was jealous, and she didn't really believe it. And so one night, he is late coming home. And she tried to call him, and he didn't answer his cell phone. This is a true story. And he didn't think to call her. And finally, 2 or 3 hours, I forget what it was, passed when he should have been home. He finally comes home. And she has already tried and convicted him and is now ready to execute him. And she knows nothing. It's all in her head. She knows nothing about what took place and why it took place and where he was. Well, number one, his cell phone battery died. So he wasn't able to answer the phone, and he wasn't able to call her. Number two, the boss asked him to stay and help him with a project that had to be done before morning the next day. Would he please stay, because he needed the help? So, okay, I'll stay. And he knew he couldn't let his wife know, but she's a good girl, she'll understand. And so he made an assumption, all right? So to make a long story short, as soon as he walked in the door, she lit into him with all kinds of accusations, and I told you so's, and you've got to stop working where you work, and I can't take this anymore, or, on and on it went. She really unloaded on him. And he was blown away. It's like, where did this come from? What? I thought I married Rachel and I got Leah. It was one of those kind of things, and it's like, what's happening here, And so she was angry. She went into the bedroom, slammed the door, and left him standing there drenched in her accusations. And at that point, he calls up and he says, "Pastor, I don't know what to do. This is what happened." And I said, you need to ask questions. That's what needs to happen. You need to ask questions. Don't retaliate. Don't make your own statements. Don't tell her she's crazy. You need to ask questions. I said, you go to the door and you speak through the door and you say, you speak nicely to her and you say something like honey or sweetheart or whatever. Say, when you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen. I have questions for you. And then you wait. And so he went back into the living room and turned on the TV, and he just waited. After a while, she came out, and she sat down on the couch, icy cold, and she finally said to him, "So you have questions?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "What are your questions?" "I want to know what you were thinking. What did you think was happening? Tell me. I want to answer your questions." And that's my question, is what were you thinking? So she began to explain the whole thing. And so one by one, he just explained to her what I explained to you. And finally, she calmed down. And they were able to pray with each other. And I said later to him, I said, after this is all over, I said, maybe we should get together and talk about some communication things. And so we did. We met periodically for a while because they didn't know how to talk to each other, how to express what was in their mind and how they felt. So these scriptures will help you with that, okay? So never make an assumption, right? You promise? Pinky promise? You promise? Okay, all right, okay. You're never going to make an assumption anymore about your spouse, what they're thinking, how they feel. You're going to ask questions. right? The proper response is this, okay? Can you do that? All right, good, all right. So here's why these things happen. Fear led Adam and Eve to make the accusations that followed. Fear is usually at the root of accusations. Fear leads to anger, and then the flow of accusations. You need to try to remember that your tongue is capable of great damage. I have known of at least 2 or 3 marriages that ended because of a few words that somebody spoke at the wrong moment in that relationship. Because if you are a introvert, you do a lot of private, quiet thinking, and you are not necessarily verbal. And a lot of things is happening inside you as an introvert that your spouse doesn't know about. And in one case, the gentleman came home from having taught school, and when he came home, his wife lit into him with a whole bunch of stuff, which she had done before. And what the problem with introverts that they have to watch out for is they're like a volcano. It just accumulates over time until something ignites it, and then boom. And on that particular night, she finally said the wrong things at the wrong time, and he just looked at her with tears in his eyes, and he said, "I'm leaving, it's over. Don't talk to me, don't write to me, don't try to get me back. I'm never coming back." He was a phlegmatic, introvert, red person. And when he made a decision, that was it. And he never came back. And she told me this story about it one time, and she said, "I totally destroyed our marriage with my conversations." So you need to remember that your words do hurt people. The old saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me," that's a total lie. That's just a total lie, okay? So that's something to remember. You want always your words, try to visualize when you speak to your spouse, try to visualize that you're talking to Jesus himself. Think about the way you've talked to your spouse in the past. If Jesus was the one you were talking to, would you use those words and those tones of voices? Probably not. How would you talk to your spouse if you were really talking to Jesus? Remember, Jesus said, "Inasmuch as you've done it to one of the least of these, you've done it to me." Okay? There's a lot of stuff here, so I'm just going to go through it, and I can't take the time to fully expound on everything, but I think you're smart enough to figure it out. Jesus said we're going to be judged by our words. Our words are going to come into the judgment. That's an important thing to remember. Good communication imparts grace and builds up. It does not tear down. If you really love your spouse, you don't want to criticize them and tear them down. You don't want to say, "You're stupid. What's wrong with you? I should never have married you. What was I thinking?" And I've heard Adventist people say this to each other in my presence. And twice in my past, I've stood up in the middle of a counseling session and I've said, "You know what? I'm done. I'm not going to sit here and listen to you guys say these terrible things to each other, because by my presence here, I'm endorsing what you're doing. I'm sorry, but I'm gone." And I stood up, I walked out. So I'm not gonna stay if you're going to talk that way to each other. I was horrified that they would speak that way and in those kinds of tones of voices. So you don't want to tear people down with the way you talk. You don't want to make statements about how they look or how they talk or make fun of things. I remember one lady, her husband had a stuttering problem. It was hard for him to communicate anyway, and when he was under stress, it was even harder. And at one point, she, in her anger, said to him, "You never learned how to talk right, and I don't even want to be around you." And so that cut him terribly. No Christian would ever do that. You're not a Christian if you talk that way. Not any Christian I know about. Christian people don't do that. They submit their heart and their mind and their mouth to Jesus. They don't speak that way. Okay? Good communication. Okay, the words of Jesus. Christ himself did not suppress one word of truth, but he spoke it always in love. He exercised the greatest tact and thoughtful, kind attention in his intercourse with the people. He was never rude, never needlessly spoke a severe word, never gave needless pain to a sensitive soul. He did not censure human weakness. I've had people say, well, Pastor, you don't know my spouse. If you had to live with my spouse, you'd talk that way too. No, that's not true. You know how I know it's not true? Because when you're around other people, let's say you're a person that curses and you use swear words. When you're around people where you know you shouldn't do that, you don't do it. You can control what you say. You're not some mindless robot that somebody pushes a button and you just sputter. You have control over your tongue. All you have to do is exercise it. You choose to let it go because you want to hurt that person. That's what it boils down to. There's the sin in your life says you have the power to hurt this person, so do it. And so you do, because you choose to do it. You can choose not to behave that way. You can choose not to talk that way. If all else fails, you can get up and walk out. And you can say, you know what, I'm not calm right now, I'm really upset right now, and I'm afraid I'm going to say something I don't want to say, so I'm going to go cool off. I mean, if all else fails, you can do that. You don't have to just blurt it all out. You have the power of choice. So you need to seek help from God, Ephesians 4:12. You know, we need, the Bible in the book of Ephesians says a lot about how we talk to each other. So you need to seek help from God and ask him to take control of your mouth and your tongue like David did when he said to the Lord, please take control of my thoughts and my words. May my words be pleasing to your sight, O Lord, my God and my Savior. So you can pray those prayers and you can seek to have a new heart, because remember, your words proceed from your heart. Your heart is turned dark toward your spouse or toward the church member. Your heart is turned dark, and because your heart is turned dark toward that spouse or that church member, you say what you say. So the real issue is your heart. Your heart is not right. Your heart is not right with your spouse. Your heart is not right with your church member friend. Your heart is not right with God. And so that leads you to say what you say. True love is a gift from God, Romans 5:5. Spend enough time with Jesus until you are in control. Ellen White said, go pray someplace and pray long enough until you're in control, and then come back and talk to the person that you need to talk to. 2 Corinthians 10:5, he will, if you let him, he will take charge of your thoughts and your actions. Psalm 141 verse 3, he will guard your lips. Volume 3 of the Testimonies, it says that if you pray and ask for the help of God, angels will be dispatched to you. This is page 363 on Volume 3 of the Testimonies. Angels will be dispatched to you, and they will choose your words for you if you sincerely and earnestly ask them to take charge of your conversation. Volume 3, page 363. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide here. Okay, so we are right here. By his grace, Ephesians 4:21-32. The Apostle Paul, inspired by the Holy Spirit, makes a list of things that are not from God. And he says, you're not in the Spirit if you speak this way to other people. So here's some biblical things to remember. Do not suspicion or make assumptions. Have you heard that before? James 4:11, do not speak negatively of your spouse. Something that both men and women are guilty of is speaking negatively of the other person when they're with a group of their peers. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing to do. Don't do it. Because it'll get back to your spouse. You can guarantee it. It will get back to your spouse. Somebody will say, hey, your wife is bad-mouthing you behind your back. What? Yeah, she was with my wife, and my wife came home and told me what she said. I thought you ought to know. Don't do it. When you speak bad about other people behind their back, it'll always get back to them. You can count on it. So just don't do it. Let's see. Strive to understand people. Don't strive to prove your point. Don't strive to be right. Strive to listen and understand. Keep your conversations private. Don't go blabbing to your brother or your dad or your mom and tell them about the private things that you talk about. Choose the timing that you talk to somebody. ladies, men typically need time when they arrive home from work to calm down, to get into a home mode. Don't hit them with a whole bunch of stuff until at least 30 minutes has gone by, preferably more like an hour, so that they have time to change their thought pattern. One gentleman, his wife couldn't seem to do it, so he said, okay, I'm going to do what I need to do before I ever walk in the door. So he established what he called his prayer tree. And when he got home from work, he would get out of his pickup and he would walk over to the tree in his front yard, and he would put his hand on the tree and he would look up to heaven and he would pray to God for a half hour before he walked in the door of the house. And that way his wife was not tempted to launch into him with a whole bunch of stuff, and he was able to listen. She couldn't restrain herself, so he gave her the time she needed by him staying outside before he would come into the house. Always defer to God's word. Focus on God. His will is revealed in the Bible. Always defer to what the Bible says, because the Bible is the authority for you, not your opinion. Listen to the thoughts and feelings of others. Be willing to receive counsel and instruction. Be swift to listen and slow to speak. Make up your mind that you're not going to fight. The only reason you fight is because you choose to fight. I know that you may disagree with that, but it's a fact. The reason you fight is because you choose to fight. You don't have to fight. You can say, I don't want to fight with you. And you can say it calmly. And you can turn around and say, I need to go cool off. I'll talk to you later. And you walk out and give each of you time out. You don't have to fight. It's your choice that you fight. The Bible says you can be angry, but don't sin. Anger is just a human emotion. It's like love or any other emotion. It's not sinful to be angry, but anger often leads you to say and do things that are sinful. A soft answer turns away wrath. Confess your faults and pray for one another. I once read in Ellen White's writing, she said, if self and selfishness were set aside, every conflict could be resolved in 5 minutes. Okay, any questions about any of this? Yes? Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, Jesus said, you've heard that it was said, you shall not kill. I say to you, you shall not even hate your brother. So, it's a hard issue. The way we talk to each other in our churches, the way we talk to each other in our homes is the result of the sin in our heart. So, yeah. The fire's making a lot of noise in my end of the building, and I didn't hear every word that you said. So could you speak up a little bit louder?
I said, so anger doesn't necessarily mean it's hateful.
Yes. Anger is not necessarily, right. Yes. Anger is just, it's like hitting your finger and you go, ow. Anger is pain. It's a different type of pain. And you can't help but have pain. Anger is pain. But what you do with that is what matters. Yeah. So. Okay. Any other questions about this? Okay. Okay. We're going to look at this tomorrow morning, so we'll save this till tomorrow morning. But a lot of things that happen with you in your churches and happen in your homes have to do with energy, and we'll talk about that in the morning. So, okay? If there are any other questions, Pastor Don, you want to come up and have a closing prayer and maybe some instruction or something? Pastor Don?
All right, so we have a break until, when's our break till, Kim?